This is a really exciting topic, and I'm going to sit down to continue with it. But it's I have the privilege of getting to know Sean and Storme over the last couple of years, and get to learn more about the work they do. And when I asked them to do this session and share their thoughts on how CFOs act as leaders and innovators, they begrudgingly said yes. I'm being a little unkind. They did say yes, and they're here. So, Sean, thank you. And Storme, thank you. Thanks for giving up your time. I know it's a busy time in the bank for you, and there's a lot going on. So we really appreciate you giving up the time. I probably couldn't do your titles and the work that you do justice. So perhaps I can kick off there, Storme. Perhaps you could just give the audience a sense of the work you do at RMB.
Sure. So I'm a CFO of the RMB corporate banking business, and one of my biggest portfolios is innovation and the target operating model for the whole of RMB finance. So some of the work that we do there is shifting the skill sets of a finance team, so taking them from pure finance background accountants into the science realm, introducing computer science, coding, bringing new tools along and getting the guys trained on it, as well as also looking at how do we better the world of our finance staff. So if you take a look at robotics process automation, how do you bring robotics process automation, machine learning, AI in to make the life of the people in the job better and get the value out of the team that we have? So that's just some of the work I do.
Okay, Sean?
Cool. Thanks, Graham. CFO of IT at Standard Bank, I think in a lot of regards well known for good things and bad things. A little bit of context, it operates across 18 countries. In SA alone, there's more than 2,000 systems, more than 4,500 people. So really simplification, innovation, modernization of our finance process has been quite pivotal to ensure stability of numbers and really enhance messaging around value.
Yeah. They sound like real experts, and they sound as though they know all these things about innovation and RPA and tech and data science. But I know both of you have walked long journeys and have had to really embrace these things. You're numbers people first and tech and innovation people second. Maybe that's changed slightly. But I'd like to kick it off there, because I think the question people are asking here as finance professionals is, how do I take responsibility for innovation? What do I do? Because really I'm a numbers person first. So maybe you could say something about leading into that space and what you've done to educate yourself and make yourself, I guess, knowledgeable about the realm that you're trying to influence.
Sure. So, my journey was, to the topic, I went to a course that was called Leading in a Digital Economy, and much like a leadership course, I actually expected to kind of go there and learn about leadership principles and, things about yourself again. And I arrived, and I was the sole accountant among 25 technology people, so CIOs, data scientists, and it was quite an experience. But having spent time with them, I realized that they have a very different way of thinking about things. They approach things from a different angle. They analyze things in a different way. And I thought to myself, it would be really great if we could complement the skill set that we have from a finance perspective with something like that. And as we evolved through kind of the journey, I spent some time understanding what companies were doing and understanding kind of the technology they were using, and realized some of the problems that we have, we could actually solve with technology that's out there already. And there's not really a need for us to always be the specialist, but for us to rather know that we can actually use some of that. So that was my journey, kind of a lot of talking, a lot of researching, a lot of spending time with companies, understanding what they could do, and just kind of spending time with people that aren't accountants. And, from that, I've started to learn to code myself and started to study engineering and very different things, very, very different from accounting, but have all complemented my journey in a certain way.
You have a day job too, right?
I do.
Okay.
I have a day job.
A finance day job.
For a corporate bank, yes.
Okay. Sean, one of the points you made when we prepared was that too often we ask people in business to do this innovation and learning work on top of instead of. So we keep them lumped with their day job. And then we say, on top of that, can you please be responsible for? How have you managed this journey, and what are you doing to lead on from that for your team to give them the instead of opportunities?
So our journey was very different from a, call it digital adoption or transformation point of view. For me, number one priority was culture transformation and really setting the right tone within the team, what I would expect them to operate as leaders. So as a leadership team, we really focused on the behaviors we think we needed to demonstrate, creating the platform where change was acceptable, creating the platform was where if you fall, it's okay, we will help pick you up. In the process, then, it became, well, guys, in the context of what behaviors we expect you to do, the context of change is good, let's now modernize our processes. So we've really focused on this ruthless process of, let's not call it innovation or digitalization as opposed to simplification, to really make sure our processes are modernized and we actually take work out that doesn't add value. I think we've come a long way. I think from a culture transformation point of view, it's great to see the team where they are, and we're really at the cusp of the team starting to self-innovate, self-change, and really drive innovation processes themselves. So it's been quite a rewarding journey.
How have you carried your own learning and kept up?
We've been fortunate enough to have an Agile coach through the process, and he's really been this person who's been the kind of ear in my shoulder. So he's consistently reminded me a couple of things. The first thing is, as a leader, command and control is something you shouldn't be doing. As a finance profession, it's something we've been taught to do.
Yeah.
So that was the behavior I had to unlearn. And then read. Fortunate enough to have a lot of breakfast with people. I mean, Storme and myself caught up last week, meet a lot of people in the journey where it really helps you, give you perspectives in terms of how other people are doing it. So fortunate enough to have a coach, and then a lot of reading and a lot of engagement going.
And Storme, you also talked about this notion of shifting the culture before you changed the process. A lot of helping your team rethink the way they behaved or what the business needed. What have you found to be most difficult in doing that? And what have you done that's been successful? Or what have you done that people here could borrow?
So I think the most difficult challenge, and Sean touched on it, is that you need the people to believe in the change. And so if you look at most of finance teams, most accountants, and processes where it's inefficient, people will complain. They'll say, oh, I work such long hours, or I've got this process and I don't want to do it. And they want change, but getting them to move to the change is the difficulty. Because to get someone to move to the change, it can't be driven by a top layer only. It can't be driven by the command and control. It has to be driven by the person themselves. Mm-hmm. So you need to get the staff or the people over the line to realize that I want that change. I need that journey. Look what the journey can give to me. Look how it can add value. And in our space, I made some mistakes initially with that. So initially, when I started the process, I was so excited by having all these conversations around robotics process automation and how these things could change our lives. I went and ran a POC. So I went and ran this POC, and I came back and I showed everyone. I was like, look what it can do. And I was this most excited human about this. And my team kind of sat there looking at it thinking, I'm not so sure, but I'm excited. That looks like my job. So what would I be doing if that did that? And I didn't take them on the journey the way I should have taken them on the journey. So I didn't sit with them and unpack the understanding to say, guys, what should we be doing? What is the worst part of your job? Okay, let's solve for the worst part of your job. How do you get the person to solve for it? So you need to take people on the journey with you. You need to make them part of it. You need to get them as excited. Just because you're excited, you can't force that onto them. So this culture of change and innovation is critical for something to continue and grow in the space.
How many of you in the audience operate in teams or businesses that have strong command and control leadership styles? Show of hands. Command and control. Does it live in your world? A fair number. Sean, one of the things I was struck by when I came to visit you at Standard Bank and your team was I went to a team meeting. And the team meeting I expected, and I know very little about finance and even less about IT, and I expected the meeting to be a lot about finance and IT, and what I discovered was that they were having a personal check-in. What does it mean to you to build that kind of rapport with people, and how has it helped you get people to what Storme refers to as over the line or seeing what the future holds?
Yeah, I think in a lot of organizations, people consistently reference trust from a leadership point of view. And unless you build that trust, and trust is a multitude of dimensions, it becomes very hard for you to take your team along the journey with you. So for me, I have a genuine interest in where my team is. I really want to understand where they are personally because it influences how they respond on a daily basis. And I mean, you talk about the challenge you had about robotics process automation. I had a similar challenge, and I then met with everyone to understand where their challenges are. So for me, that touch point and that check-in is so important. It builds a rapport, it builds a relationship, and you've then actually got an ability to understand where that person is mentally and to help them change. I'm going to reference on one specific challenge I had with one individual where he said, well, actually, Sean, I don't want to go on this modernization journey because I'm worried about my job. And I asked him one question, are you getting to everything you need to get to in your day job? And his answer was no. And we moved on. And having that rapport and that ability to have the conversation as openly as that is so important to driving a transformational change.
You've both used the words in our preparation and conversations, either simplicity or simplification. And I guess the audience are here because it's not simple. Simplifying. If you find a business challenge or a finance challenge, how do you get your team to begin to look for ways to simplify? What are the steps that you've taken and that you've refined in getting them to own it and to simplify?
So I mean, I think from an ownership point of view, we've never really struggled in the team. I think the team definitely wants to own solutions. And as finance individuals, through our career, when you go through kind of your studies, you find solutions. So here's a company, they need to record it this way. They've got a tax problem, they need to record it this way. So we're used to finding the solutions. I think the way in which we go about it is something that we've kind of found a different way of looking at. So having spent some time with scientists and data people, I took my guys on a journey to say, what if you could be the accountant you are, but think like a scientist. So scientists spend most of their time defining a problem statement as opposed to finding the solution. Because once you actually understand the problem statement, the solution's usually quite easy to match. So if you knew I was struggling to record this, that's your problem. To find the solution, you can then look at many options because you've understood the problem. So we started a journey of something called the problem with the problem statement. So if you go and ask your teams and you do an experiment, say they're trying to solve something, go ask them just to give you a problem statement. So what is the problem statement they're trying to solve? I'm almost betting to say majority will struggle to give you a simplistic problem statement, which is why the solutions we come up with end up not being the most simple things, because we solve for something and then we have to kind of build on top of it because we just haven't spent that extra time getting that problem statement to something that is simple enough that between us, technology, business can be understood. Because we all talk a different language, and that was the crux of kind of the problem with the problem statement journey that we took the team on.
Yeah. Simplification in your world?
So a very different, I guess, journey to Storme. We had a team who was very reluctant to change. So we didn't understand the problem statement because we didn't want to change. And for me, it was very evident that we were manual, we were complicated, we had a whole bunch of things. We tried, to your earlier point, a couple of different mechanisms that failed. Ultimately, talking about command and control, I did go very command and control in this behavior, but it was with very firm intent. Those first 3 or 4 examples, I needed to take the team through the journey step by step and to tell them what to do. In the process, really educate them, train them, reward them, and show to everyone else that actually change is good. In 2 instances, we had ladies who effectively their day jobs ceased to exist because we automated processes. And we were forced in terms of making sure they then went on to better and bigger roles to kind of show to everyone else that change is a good thing. And that was the kind of really hard part we followed. We're kind of still at that stage now, but it's great to see the cusp of where people have seen these other people being recognized and rewarded for what they've done. And they're now starting to what I would call self-innovate and self-simplify. But that's been the better half of a 12 to 18-month journey to try and get to this, to the cusp where people are saying, actually, it's okay for me to experiment. My boss isn't going to reprimand me if something's broken. And I actually know there's someone there to help me if there's a problem. So a little bit of a different journey. As I said, we had a team that was very change resistant. resistant, and it has to be forced and engineered to get to the point that the team acknowledges it's okay.
So one of the keys that I'm hearing is walk the road with them early on. Point to the thing that you want them to understand and reach, be clear on what that is, and then make a success of people who walk that road with you, because it diminishes the fear.
Yeah.
It means that people start to say, oh, this is possible, I will have a new opportunity, this will not put me out of work, I will grow, I will be given new opportunities. It speaks to, and we started there and we've talked a little bit about simplification, but it's back to leadership style. What's been your biggest lesson as a leader in this realm?
So I think it's, for me, the biggest lesson has been to, and I think Sean touched on it a bit, it's to take time out and spend the time understanding with the people. So the world we live in is just consuming. So there's always something going on, there's always something that's more critical, there's always something that's more important, there's always going to be that. And especially if you're in a finance team, the world is always going to evolve, but you need to find that place where you can take the time out as a leader, you can understand the position you are in as a leader, and you can understand the position your team is in, because you can't lead a team if you don't know where they're positioned, because you can't do the command and control anymore. It just won't work. But that involves you taking time out for yourself, because that's also where you start to come up with the solutions and the things where you can start to understand things. Because if you can read and you can spend time speaking to people or having breakfast, that's your time out that will give you the energy to drive the leadership of your team.
You talked about servant leadership in our conversation.
So very similar to what Storme was saying, we've also adopted a principle of what we call servant leadership, or let's call it facilitative leadership. I hate the word of servant leadership. But it's really about making sure as a team that you treat all each other as equals. And what I have versus what a junior staff has isn't necessarily superiority, as opposed to just experience, which gives contextual relevance in a problem statement. And that's been quite important. So how I show up, making sure that I treat everyone as an equal. And then it's not about me telling Barry that actually this is the way you're going to do things. Let me help you understand why that could work and couldn't work based on experience, and then help you succeed. And that's really the premise of servant leadership. Understand the problem, work together, we're all equals, and let's help tackle this problem as a collective.
It's easier said than done in hierarchical environments, and banks, like it or not, are quite hierarchical. Have you done anything in your own way to unravel some of that hierarchy? Yes, treat people the same, show up, talk to them about the problem, help them see it, understand it. But have you done anything personally that's helped you?
For me, it's really about making sure I'm consistent in terms of living and breathing it every day. I guess naturally my style's like that, so I'm very happy engaging with anyone and everyone. That being said, is we do have a bit of friction probably within the organization, where a style like I'm talking about is contrary to organizational behaviors. And that's a fine line we have to walk, and that's probably going to be the next step in our journey, just to make sure we don't create an organizational resentment against our team, because I treat everyone as an equal, yet in other structures, junior staff members not represented as an equal. So personally, I'm comfortable with that style. The journey we're going to have to walk now is how we moderate that behavior across an organization that is partly command and control and partly, let's call it facilitative in nature. I think that's our next journey.
Yeah. For you, Storme?
Yes, so I think coming from an RMB background, we're a lot less hierarchical because we're a lot smaller. So we have a very flat structure, and it was actually quite easy to have that because our culture is one of owner-manager culture. So, generically what our guys do is you would run your area like it's your business, and it is fairly flat. So I think it was maybe a little bit easier for us to go on that journey, and that's where the team was positioned from that perspective.
You've both mentioned the importance of getting people to adopt a challenger mindset. So to say to people, you have to challenge, you have to think for yourself. It's a key element in getting people to be innovative and own the problem and identify or create the problem statement that makes sense and iterate it. How have you helped people do that? I appreciate your style, that's one part of it. But what else have you done overtly to get people to challenge? It's, again, in big organizations, it's not often encouraged. The challenger is often found on the outside or exited quite quickly if they aren't adding value, and there are long roads to adding value.
So in IT and Standard Banks really adopted what we call Agile at scale. And the whole principles of Agile at scale is co-located teams. Everyone's equal, everyone has an opinion, and the team needs to operate together. So quite early in the process, we started running what we called extended stand-ups for a couple of things from a finance process point of view. So we run our month-end stand-up, business day -1 to business day +3. A couple of things we did there.
Can you just, because I'm the idiot, so I'm going that I might be on the bottom end of the scale, but what does a stand-up mean for those who are not IT?
So the whole point of a stand-up is, firstly, work is visualized. So the best thing is if everything's visualized on a wall or on a screen, you've all got a common understanding of the problem statement. The idea is it's a short, focused huddle where people stand up and talk about a problem statement for no more than 15 to 20 minutes. So let me talk about it in the context of my month-end process. Each area can check in very quickly to say, where am I, what's your numbers, what's the changes? And for me, it's a 10-minute meeting 3 times, 4 times a month, and we're done with the month-end process. But in that, though, the importance is equality of everyone, and everyone's got a voice. So we used this month-end stand-up as a behavior to firstly communicate, but also to show that people were equal and to allow the changes across the stack. Firstly, as a leadership team, my leadership team does not attend that month-end stand-up. Why? Because when you're there, people feel shy to talk. The second thing is we then drove a behavior to say, well, actually, I want different people talking to the numbers every month. And it's more venturing an opinion as opposed to being the right opinion. So, interesting enough, we had the stand-up yesterday, and it's, I think my number's going to be at X. That's acceptable because you're forcing the people to have an opinion, regardless of grade. And that's been quite pivotal to us, coupled with everything else, to show people that actually it's okay to have an opinion. And if it changes, that's cool, but let's just understand why and we'll move on. So our whole Agile co-location kind of stand-up Kanban servant leadership philosophy has really helped us let everyone feel like they're equal. It was quite fascinating to me. There's a new guy who's been part of the team for 2 months. Yesterday, he was talking about the numbers in a portfolio. And that's kind of really rewarding for me.
It's almost acceptable norm. He doesn't know different, right?
Exactly.
He's walked into an environment where he sees this as being the way that things
really
work.
good.
For you, Storm?
So obviously my team was at a different place, but for us what we did was I sat with every staff member that I had and I asked them to articulate to me what was the worst part of their job. So what was the worst part of your job? What takes so much time? And what do you hate most about what you do and you sit here? And then I made them, or I kind of gave them the option to come up with the solution themselves. So I introduced them to a whole bunch of tool sets, so storytelling, Power BI, Python, robotics process automation, AI, machine learning, all of the tools, gave them training, got them skilled on it, got them to understand how they'd be able to use it, where they could use it, and then let them solve their worst problem with something that we had shown them. And the stuff that they came out with has truly been quite mind-blowing. I mean, from a kind of, this is, if you can imagine a room of 50 accountants that haven't really done something from science in their world, building a Raspberry Pi, which is like a mini hardboard. They sat there physically building them. They then coded those Pis to open up gates and security doors and switch on lights. And then they took that to the next level and they said, well, I analyze a whole bunch of data. So instead of me sitting here for 4 or 5 hours a day running this, why don't I build a bit of code in Python and let it do it for me? Why don't I put it through robotics process automation? I mean, I was quite surprised when we started off the financial year our financial year last month, and I went and said, guys, how's the Flash going? And they said, well, why don't you open Power BI on your phone and you can see how the Flash is? So they solved their problems by us giving them the kind of tools to do it. And I think that is empowering, and I think it's awesome to watch from the teams, but we had to make it real for them. So we had to give them the training and show how it could be relative to what they're doing, but at the same time give them the autonomy to solve their own problem and not force them to take the solution we thought would be best.
I guess the cynic in the room, and they're accountants, so there are many of them, might be thinking, yes, but it's the bank and there's lots of resources, and so you could just throw money at these problems and training and tools and opportunities. You talked about, is that true? Has it just been a sort of open checkbook to get people to do it, or have you done it on a shoestring, or have you done it with no budget? I just wanted to make sure that people don't assume it was all done with big checkbooks.
So I mean, particularly on our side, we haven't had a checkbook at all. So every piece that we've had to implement has had to kind of come from something else. So, you know, you kind of get your set budget for a year, and that's what you've got, and that's what you've got to work with. When it comes to training, most organizations do training. The question I ask you is, do you get something out of the training? So, you know, going to very technical training used to be the trend. So someone would sign up for a Basel course, or they would sign up for this event or that event, and they would be 2-3 days events that would cost maybe 14 to 16,000 rand for that actual event. We shifted that to say, okay, well, do you need that training? So do you need more technical training, or do you need something different, a different skill set? So we just used our resourcing in a very different way. And then what we've done with the robotics process automation, because obviously that does cost to have something developed, there's license fees. Through the savings in the business that we've been able to deliver through the processes, that's how we've funded that. So simple things like we'll pick up on expenditure that, you know, seems like you don't need that, or you're spending this, or is a better way to do this, or what if you engage the vendor because now you have different analytics to engage them on, those kind of things. So timing of your P&L, so in the world where we live, where exchange rates move, if you time and you can understand your P&L a lot better before, you can kind of alleviate some of the FX movements that you sit with. So we've funded it all through that kind of work in our space. We haven't been given an additional checkbook or anything to do it, but the team has done it. So they've changed their training. They found the ways to do it. So that's what's the empowering thing about it.
Almost the exact same story. I think the first step is we didn't go through a cost-saving initiative at all. Over the last 2 years, the cost of my finance function is down probably 10% year on year, purely because we've done work differently. Everything is behaviorally orientated, as we've just talked about, so there's been more kind of informal coaching amongst the team. And then in terms of our innovation from a systems and a process point of view, everything we've done to date is using the native system the way it should be, as opposed to custom development, custom changes. So very similar to what you're saying, Storm. You know, really you find that if you start doing things differently very quickly, you free up capacity. You free up mind space to do those things that normal organizations would pay more money for.
I want to press pause and see if there are any questions in the audience. Yes, sir. Will you use the mic just?
Sorry. You mentioned tools, Storm, that you brought into the system, into your organization. Which ones have you found been the most beneficial? And because often it's low-hanging fruit, and then it's sort of
Sure. So the first thing, I think kind of the robotics process automation has been a huge tool. So the physical fact that you can have software that can log in, execute the task, the mundane task. Now there's many licenses and so forth that you can take for that, but that tool has been exceptionally powerful in giving capacity to people to be able to do their job better. But if we just go to kind of some of the other tools that we widely use now, I mean, if you just take any normal accountant, and I can almost do it by a kind of show of hands in the room, I'm pretty certain it's either death by PowerPoint or death by Excel, because those are the two tools that have always been there for us to use. Data has become kind of too large for some of the Excel world. So taking Python into that world has actually worked quite well for us. Being one of the simpler languages in terms of coding, it's been easy enough to get people over the line. The other thing with Python is there's lots of libraries that already exist for code that's already available. So if you want to look something up, or if you want to, that code already exists, so you can use the library to kind of go pick it up. So you don't have to be this, great developer to be able to use it. It's just a far more efficient way of using it. So Python has definitely been a success in our space. And the other thing that's been a huge success is Power BI. So the fact that it's agile enough to be on iPads, cell phones, it's available, that has been a huge thing for us. And it kind of takes away the need of having 5, 6, 7, 8 different PowerPoint presentations, because you can bring them all together and just expose this piece to this crowd and this piece to that crowd. But then you've got like one consolidated piece of your Power BI sitting there, but you've got different audiences that can see different parts of it. So those two tools have worked particularly well for us.
I'm going to be provocative. A whiteboard marker and a piece of paper. A very different perspective, right? For our point in our journey, it was very, very visual. And that was a big success. Sorry, being very provocative there.
No, but I mean, so I think it's a critical thing, because you can't drive innovation in a team, and this is what we had the discussion around when we had breakfast the other day, unless you have the culture in the team. So I had a team that was already set up with the culture. They were already, used to change. We were driving certain things. From your side, it was a very different journey. So it's really important that you actually do need both of the perspectives. So you can't just go take a team and dive them into changing and become innovators, and the world has to change tomorrow, and I want you to start all coding, if the culture of the team isn't at that level yet, because you will set yourself up for failure. As a leader, you need to understand the team and then bring the stuff that will complement where that team is.
There was another question there somewhere. Anybody else? No? Okay. One of the things that I wanted to ask you was this idea that finance are either the gatekeepers of risk or the innovators seems to be part of conversations I hear regularly with CFOs. So people ask, can we spend more? Can we do more? I hear a lot of set the tone, lead by example from the two of you. So that's what finance, I think, is becoming. But where does the work that you do influence innovation beyond your teams? How is it beginning to help the organization beyond your team? Because it's one thing to innovate in your silo, in your space, but how has it helped roll out into the organization and set some tone or provide some examples?
So, I mean, I can kind of from our side, the robotics process automation itself, it started in finance. So it was born in finance, in RMB, and as a finance team, we're very proud of that. But how it has evolved in RMB has been amazing. So we have developed what we call a Center of Excellence for Robotics, and the whole of RMB is using that. The benefit that's been delivered into the total organization from a simple proof of concept from one team driving something has been huge. And I must say, the work that went into the Center of Excellence, we certainly do have a really kind of world-class Center of Excellence sitting there for robotics. And I think the other things that people start to see is that finance is kind of at the center of the business universe. So you face front office, you face operations, you face risk, you face IT, you face all the different areas, because everyone kind of does have a budget and they do come to you for the numbers, but you see what happens in them. So you're very fortunate in the finance space that you interact with all the other areas. So if you can start to drive the change and the leadership, it's almost like it starts to trickle through to the other spaces. So the work we've done in finance has actually in our world rolled over into our operations team. And our ops team is a transformed place that's also starting to look at all these different things, driving their own training needs for certain things, solving their own problems. So I think it's almost contagious from a finance perspective, and we've definitely seen it in our organization growing.
Sean?
Tough question. Probably seen two things started to happen. The first up is from a IT finance function. The degree of engagement we've had with extended stakeholders is fundamentally different. So as opposed to spilling over, we've started to see a very different engagement in terms about value conversations. Historically, we would have been a function that sat on the proverbial ninth floor reporting numbers. We're now actively involved in massive contracts, massive value-add discussions. So in that regard, it hasn't necessarily spun over in terms of the broader organization. We've started to see the team behaving in a different way to influence management decisions. The other thing, which is maybe slightly unsettling for me, a lot of my team is starting to get poached by other divisions in the bank. And I take that as a compliment.
Sure.
And what I'm kind of hoping is a lot of the behaviors we start seeing start manifesting in another way. So we haven't spun over per se hardcore innovation or proverbial RPA. We've had a little bit of a different influence on the organization. Early stages though, I'd really like to see this changing more over periods to come.
There's no doubt that finance has that ability to influence and knock on not just process, but culture and style and engagement. And I think it's the thing that organizations have been calling for is how do we partner with finance? You hold so much knowledge. You really can help us. Advice to people just entering this journey. So they're about to go down an innovation journey or they've just fallen into the rabbit hole. The one or two things that you would say, this you have to do. And I'm going to already say your own know-how, attitude, and reading is a given, so that we've been clear on here. The other one is something about being clear on the problem. So if you can't clearly identify the problem between us and the stakeholders, don't begin. But individually, what advice would you offer this room of professionals as they fall into that journey?
So I think my advice would be that you don't have to be a specialist. So the way I see the world, the time has changed from us being specialists about everything to just being aware of it. So you don't have to be a specialist. You can embrace and use other people and crowdsource and try different ways, but use the society and the community around you. So as a finance community, we've got many ways, many types of things that we can connect on with LinkedIn and everything else that's available now. Don't try to be a specialist. Try and solve by speaking, linking to other people that have done it before or that have gone down the journey, because you could take pieces of their journey to make your own journey.
Collaboration. Okay, Sean?
I was going to use the word vulnerability, and you've just almost hit those words exactly. It means acknowledging when you've made a mistake. It means acknowledging you don't know how to solve the problem statement. It means sitting there working through it together, not feeling like you always need to show up as a leader or always showing like you need the answer. And in that, you get a sense of authenticity. And, just being authentic, showing vulnerability for me has definitely helped me connect with my team. But also the team feel like, actually, you know what? I can go and sit with Sean. I don't know how to solve this problem, or anyone else, and let's collectively kind of tackle the problem statement.
And that's quite counterintuitive to accountants, right?
Yes.
You're trained to see the problem and know the answer, and there's very little to be vulnerable about. And so it's almost rewiring yourself to think differently about your work and say, I don't know, more often than not. Okay. I'm going to pause there. Some more questions? Here's your chance. Any takers? It's been so comprehensive. There are no questions.
We answered every question, Graham.
That's amazing. That's amazing. There you go. And there's another one in the front here afterwards. Yes, sir.
Hi, sorry. My name's Nicholas. I just wanted to ask a question. Do you guys have any advice on getting the timing of introducing a new system into your business right? You obviously sometimes you see there's so many systems out there that can add value or things that can show improvement, but obviously, like we said, everything comes at a cost. And me being in a smaller business, which is very cost sensitive, people can be very reluctant before they actually want to spend money on things like that. And then on the other side of the coin, you also don't want to wait so long until basically you'll be losing any competitive edge out of the system because you're basically just catching up and everybody else has done it. So how do you time that right and also convince the rest of the business that now is the right time to introduce a new system?
Good question.
I take a very different view on that. Being in IT, I see thousands of systems that profess to solve every problem that never do. So I don't believe systems solve problems. I believe specifically with my team, we've got a long way to go before I will feel like the systems are inhibiting my ability to grow. For me, the number one thing would be getting the team to the point where they're using the systems appropriately, driving their processes appropriately. Only once I think I would be comfortable with that decision would I be willing to even entertain a new system. So maybe indirectly I've answered your question. I think only all of us will intrinsically know when we're using the systems effectively and properly. As I said, for me, we've probably got every software license under the sun, and I seriously question why you need another software for something when you should actually be focusing on driving the people process changes first.
And I agree. So I think for me, it's answer what your problem statement is that you're trying to solve for, because it's very easy to fall into the trap. Oh, there's this new, let's get that one, let's take it, it can do this. And you haven't even considered that what you have there may very well solve that exactly same problem, but it was just exciting and they were the flavor of the week and that was what everyone was using. So before deciding on a system or anything, I would look at what the problem statement was and what is the simple way we are trying to solve the actual problem that we have first.
Hello. I was interested in what you said about the Centre of Excellence for Robotics. Just imagining putting something like that in, was that made up of homegrown talent from your team who had been exposed to robotics and then peeled off into that world? Or to set something up like that, do you need to bring in external talent who are experts? So
what we actually did was, as I went on my robotics journey, there was another person in the organization that was just as passionate about robotics. So she came on the journey with me, and through the two of us, we kind of got it up and running. And from her space, she took people from around the business. So business analysts, technology guys that already existed in the businesses, that had seen parts of it, that had been part of the process to initially start up the Centre of Excellence. So obviously there was much consultation with everyone to make sure you have the right skill sets, but because they had been part of the journey and they understand the RMB culture and they'd been part of it, it was a lot easier to get it set up. If you want scale, then at some stage you get to the point where you need to bring in some external guys. But we tried to use the talent internally, and we also still tried to drive from, kind of continuous sessions around people that have been through the journey before. Because with robotics and any of the other kind of automation tools, they all sound phenomenal and they're all wonderful when you get to the output. But one thing that has to be known is that the journey to get to that output is not just, okay, I just give a piece of paper and someone's going to build it. You need the people to participate, and you need to do that part properly. Otherwise, what you get doesn't end up being what you want. So it's easier if you have the people that know the process, that have gone the journey internally, and then you just feed the external help as you so need it, and depending on what it may be. So it may be help on which license, or it may be help on where the development should sit, or it may be help on various things, but you use what you have first, because the devil's in the detail in all of those things.
It's been a fascinating conversation, and my big takeaway, and I run a small business too, is start with the people. Start with helping them think about what problem we're trying to solve for and articulating it clearly, and then helping them walk a journey towards that goal, and constantly saying, I don't have the answers, let's find them together. Allowing people to put their hand up and venture an opinion, and you only do that if you become more authentic and step away a little bit. I love the contrast between the tech, which we've talked about, and the stand-up environment, which I've been to see, literally in the corner of Sean's office. How many people sit on that floor? About 100, maybe more?
Yeah.
Maybe 120. In a corner, there's sticky notes and pieces of paper and a whiteboard, and that's where they have the stand-up. And somebody talked me through it, and it looks like a maze, but the person who talked me through it was relatively new, and he was sort of incredibly passionate about how this thing works, and it's all about the people. So if you've taken on a role which says, we want you to be innovating, we think you should be responsible for innovation in this organization, finance must lead from the front, start with the people. Start with the people, and be very clear on what problem you're trying to solve, because the rest will take care of itself. You'll know when to use the right system, you'll be able to experiment with the right things, and you will probably also grow as a leader. And I want to thank you both for coming up here and being very authentic and true to form and saying a lot about the journey. It hasn't been easy. You were both very honest with me about some of the trials and tribulations. It can look pretty at the end, but it isn't always that easy. So ladies and gents, please give them a big round of applause. Thanks, Storme.
Thank you.